in terms of people you've worked with or covered? Because we even saw that you were at the Joe Namath Guarantee press conference. It's prior to Super Bowl III, Brent, in the crowd there. Who's the biggest character you've ever come across?
Well, the biggest character for me, Rich, would have been Muhammad Ali. And he was in Chicago. And I've always said that he probably helped get me a steady job in broadcasting.
How so?
Because I would go down to his house with a tape recorder, and he had just become a black Muslim. He had just joined up with Elijah Muhammad. And he would walk in a very modest house on the south side of Chicago, and there were always a couple of bodyguards at the end of the hallway, and they were always in suit and tie, and I always knew that underneath that suit, they were packing. And you would go, and they would look at you, and they would check the tape recorder, and then you would kind of go around the corner into a very modest living room with a couch and a couple of chairs across from it. And Muhammad would come in alone, and I had known him because I had covered him early in his career. And so I'd ask him one question, and he'd put on a show. And pretty soon the bodyguards were in the room, too, laughing along with him. He was a great showman, and he loved to be the center of attention. And I'm the prettiest, I'm the baddest, and on he would go. And I'd take it back, and they were so impressed, not with the nature of the question, but the answers that I was getting. And the one sports personality that they had, Rick Weaver, wanted to do play-by-play, which this station didn't do. And so they said, would you leave the newspaper and come over? And I've always thought it was the tapes that I brought back from the champ that turned it. I later covered him in a fight. It was a very sad fight. It was out in Las Vegas. He was over the hill, and he lost to Leon Spinks. But number two would be that picture that you're referring to with Joe Namath at poolside in Fort Lauderdale. And if you look closely at Joe, that very engaging, warm smile that he's always had, and there are a couple of women behind him who are asking for an autograph. And this is a couple of days before the Super Bowl. It was also the week. People have forgotten that during that week, Commissioner Rozelle made it official that it was the Super Bowl. They had tried for a very long time for the NFL-AFL championship game, but that wasn't going to make it because the newspapers always referred to it as a Super Bowl. And so then Rozelle announced it that week, but that got lost because of Joe Namath going to the Miami Country Club and accepting an award that night, in which matter-of-factly he stood up and said, we're going to beat the Colts. I guarantee it. And it was not braggadocio. It was none of us were. Dave Anderson was there from the New York Times. He was very close to Joe. He had been driven over to the dinner with us. And none of us called our newspapers back in Chicago or New York and updated the stories. I think Newsday probably was the only one, as I recall. It was just a little two-paragraph thing in their sports section. But it was after the game, after he had dismantled Baltimore as an 18-point underdog. Then they began to refer back to the guarantee game. But in today's era, that would be, you and I both know, a huge, huge headline.
Oh, no
on
doubt.
Friday morning. But it was not. It has taken on a life of its own. But to see a bunch of writers, to see a bunch of sports writers out there engaging Namath poolside. Now, just think about trying to get to either of those quarterbacks in Houston if you're a newspaper man at their hotel next week when you're down there. It would be impossible. So it was a totally different era, and that was the most important Super Bowl ever played. It gave the AFL credibility. Oakland and Kansas City had lost the first two. Vince Lombardi had been decisive in both with the Green Bay Packers. But number three was the first of the sellouts because the New York crowd, a lot of them lived in Miami, and a lot of them traveled down, Rich. And so I would put Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali at the top of that list. And Joe Namath was very close to me and played golf here at Los Angeles Club for a long, long time. And he still stops, signs autographs, says hello to fans. I'm sure he'll be down in Houston attending some of the corporate gatherings down there. He's just a terrific personality. He means a lot to for the National Football League.
No question.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.